This show is brought to you by SalCal Real Estate Connections. We're here tonight with the author of The Final Revelation, The Sun Project, Rick Teles, and of course, my favorite Martian, Steve Parker, and yours truly, Larry Mangello. And tonight's show, due to some viewer requests, asked us about shows we always reference. And one of the shows is always naturally the Roswell incident, which I think is the most famous of all UFO events. And tonight, Rick, we're going to let the public know what happened at this event.
Well, we're going to start talking about the Roswell incident. Over the next few shows, we're going to be looking at probably what were the most significant 10 incidences from 1947 to present day. And of course, this all starts with Roswell. Roswell was the beginning of what we call the modern era of the UFO syndrome or phenomenon. So we're going to take a look at Roswell tonight, and we're going to do 3 shows on Roswell because it's that big. And tonight we're going to talk about the story, what happened at Roswell, or what the story was, who was involved, and the questions that it raised. Okay, and then in the next show, following week, we're going to talk about what we actually learned at Roswell. But tonight we're gonna just start by let's talk about the story itself and what really happened. And I'm sure people have heard about Roswell. Some people have heard a little bit about Roswell. Some people know a whole lot more about Roswell. So what I'm going to try and do is clarify, based on 21st century knowledge, what happened and what the stories really were, what we were aware of.
Now, where is Roswell?
Roswell, New Mexico, kind of what, southeastern part of Mexico, New Mexico. I forgot how many miles it is from Phoenix, but you know, it's south of Albuquerque that way. But it's kind of in the middle of nowhere.
And what date did this actually happen, Rick?
Okay, what happened was on July 8th, 1947, the United States Army issued a press release that said they had recovered what they called a flying disc on a ranch just outside of Roswell, New Mexico. And what we're looking at here is the newspaper. Of course, you know, the media jumped on it right away. And this was the newspaper that came out. I actually have an original copy of this. And it was reporting that the Army Air Force at the time was the Roswell Army Air Force. The Air Force didn't come into play until the end of '47. They said they found this flying saucer. Well, that story was quickly retracted that same day. Upon orders from above, actually from Fort Worth, from a General Ramey, who was the commander of the 8th Air Force in Fort Worth, Texas. He made them change the story, and what they said is, no, you didn't find a flying saucer. What you found was the remains of a weather balloon. And that's what people read. So there's a lot of stories that came out and said, there's another newspaper that said Roswell saucer emptied by General Ramey. But there's a lot of funny things that happened that when you look at this story, you're saying, wait a minute, what really did happen? And we're gonna talk a little bit about that. So let me tell you what happened on July 8th. Apparently something crashed on the Foster Ranch around July 4th, 1947. There was heavy thunderstorms. Everybody knew this, and something crashed on the ranch. Well, on or about July 4th, the ranch foreman, somebody by the name of William Mac Brazel, he was out on horseback checking. This was a sheep farm, checking the sheep. And this is Mac Brazel here, Mac Brazel and his wife. He found this debris, and it was a debris field that was roughly 600 feet wide by almost a mile long, of all different types of material. We can talk about that in a moment. What he did is he took a look at this, and he showed it. He gathered up some pieces, and he showed it to his neighbors, his closest neighbors, somebody by the name of Fred and Loretta Proctor. And they took a look at this stuff, and they say, this is something what is this? We've never seen anything like this before. Now, it's important to note that people like the Proctors, Brazel, a lot of ranchers were finding weather balloons on their property all the time. They would find the weather balloons and actually find a thing called a radio sonde, which is something like this. We can talk about that in a little while. And they would return these
for a reward.
For a reward to the air base.
Yeah.
So they were pretty familiar with weather balloons. Well, he found this one, and he couldn't explain it. So the proctor said, maybe what you should do is take it to the county sheriff. So what he did is he gathered up some of this material, and he went to Roswell, which was closer, to the Chavez County Sheriff, which was George Wilcox, right here. And he showed this to George Wilcox. And Wilcox said, you know, I don't know what this is. maybe it's something that Roswell Army Airfield was doing something with. Maybe, they had something up in the air.
Something testing or something.
Right.
Yeah.
Roswell Army Airfield at the time was the home of the 509th Bombardment Group. Now, most people aren't going to know who these guys are. They're the ones who dropped the bomb in Japan on both cities. They were the only nuclear force in the world at the time. So you figure these are some pretty high-level guys. Well, what happened was on that date, so on July 7th, he brought this material into Wilcox. He said, you better bring it to the base. He brought it to the base, and he showed it to Colonel Butch Blanchard, the commander of the base, of 509th. And Blanchard then had Jesse Marcel, Colonel, at the time, Major Jesse Marcel come in. And he was head of base intelligence. So he had to be a pretty sharp guy, all right? What he then did is he assigned Marcel, and we're going to look at these people in a minute. He assigned Marcel and another man by the name of Captain Sheridan Cavett to go back out to the site and take a look at it. Now, Cavett was a member of the Counterintelligence Corps, which is a special branch of the Army at the time. These people reported to nobody except Washington and the Pentagon. So whatever they did was kept very secret. So they went out there, they saw the debris, they saw a furrow in the field that was almost a mile long. And they gathered up pieces of this debris and they brought it back. It was at that point that Blanchard ordered another guy by the name of Lieutenant Hout, Walter Hout, to issue the press release. Okay, and then we know that at that point from Texas they came back and they said, no, cancel that. It was a weather balloon.
Okay. And these are credible people. I mean, we're talking the 509th.
509th Nuclear Bomb Group and the head of base intelligence. Well, what ended up happening, everybody kind of saw this now infamous photograph that was taken when Marcel was ordered to actually fly some of this material to Fort Worth, Texas. He went there. He was then brought into a room where Ramey, who was this man right here, said, we want to take your picture with this debris. Marcel walked into the room, and what he was later to tell us is what was on the ground was pieces of a weather balloon. And he said, this isn't what I found. And Ramey said, take your picture with this and just go with whatever we say. Okay? So this is the piece of the weather balloon that he had. Now, subsequent to this, the Air Force came out and eventually said, well, what they found wasn't a weather balloon, it was a raw wind device.
A what?
It was a raw wind device. A raw wind was another type of weather balloon which was sent aloft to measure winds. Wait a minute, stop. The Air Force then came back and said, no, 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 I'm sorry. It wasn't a raw wind device, it was Project Mogul.
Mogul, yeah, that's it.
Project Mogul.
Project Mogul looks like this. It had a bunch of
and there's
reflectors.
The miniature. There's a miniature.
Here's a miniature of the reflector. They would have 8 of these or more on a string. They were about 4 feet long.
Okay.
They would go aloft on a weather balloon. You can see them here. The purpose of these was to measure radiation in the atmosphere. What they could do is measure the radiation in the atmosphere and determine if the Soviets were conducting nuclear tests. And this is what he misunderstood or misinterpreted to be a flying saucer. Okay?
Well, that's what they said.
Right. What happened, many people thought that the minute the story came out that this was a weather balloon, that Roswell went away, and it didn't come back until 1978. Well, that's not true. Roswell actually came back in 1967 when this publication was put out. And this was by Look magazine, and it talked about, in 1967, everybody was talking about flying saucers. And in this publication, there's a mention of Roswell, okay, that they found something called a flying saucer, but then later they called it a weather balloon.
Now, how did they find that out? Was that going back to that old newspaper? I mean, that's a story that was like 20 years before
They just went back, right, they went back to the old newspaper.
Okay.
In 1978, Marcel came out, now a lieutenant colonel, or he had retired as a lieutenant colonel, and he said, that's not what I found. He goes, I have to, he was very sick. He had probably a few years to live. He had lung cancer. He goes, I want to tell the truth. So he went out and he told the story that what he found was material not of this world. He said it did stuff that nothing else could do. He said he could roll up. It looked like tinfoil, but it wasn't. It was very light metal. He could roll it up. It would unroll itself. They would try and scratch it with a knife.
Couldn't dent it?
They couldn't dent it. He said he found stuff that looked like, he goes, in 78, he goes, I can say now it looked like fishing line. Back then they only had cord fishing line, but he said it looked like filament, fishing line. And he said, it wasn't what they said it was. We found something truly not of this world. So now we have this person, Lieutenant Colonel, he was promoted, saying, that's not at all what I found. I did not find a weather balloon. I found something not of this world. So it raised a lot of questions. Why is this Roswell story so enduring? Why won't it go away? So what we want to do tonight is talk a little bit about these people, who they were, what they said, and what the story ended up being, the questions it raised. And in our next show, we're going to talk about how we answer all those questions. Yes. Now, since then, there's been over 600 witnesses that they found, all telling different stories. We're going to focus tonight, we can't do all 600, we're going to focus on the people probably central to the whole issue and probably the most credible people, all right? So we'll explain a little bit, about who they are and what happened. So we know what the incident was now at this point, what people say it was. We know it wasn't, or we heard it was in the end a targeting device. In 1995, the General Accounting Office was asked to do, they were asked to follow up on this and see what you can find out about Roswell. Well, it was interesting. They went through a lot of information. They said, we can't find any other information other than it was a weather balloon. There was another follow-up in 1997. It was interesting because in the 1995 report, they came out and said it was a Rowan device. And then, Rowan device. And in 1997, then they came back as, oh no, it was Project Mogul. So they switched twice. But let's talk about some of these people that we have here. At the top here, we have General Roger Ramey, who was commander of the 8th Air Force. When he heard this story, he kind of went ballistic, and he told them, retract that story, tell these people it was a weather balloon. Okay, fine. Here we have Colonel William Butch Blanchard, commander of the 509th Bomb Group. He was a graduate of West Point. All right, he was in command of the 509th at that time, and Jesse Marcel worked for him. Okay, so what happened was Blanchard told Marcel, Major Marcel at the time, go out and take a look and see what you have there. All right, so he went out with this man, who was Sheridan Cavett, who was the CIC officer at the time. They were best friends.
What's CIC?
Counterintelligence Corps.
Okay.
I had some people tell me that the Counterintelligence Corps back then was everything you heard them to be. If they told you to be quiet or you disappear, you did what you were told to do.
Yes, sir.
So these two men went out to the site to see what they could find. And what they found was, as I mentioned, a site almost a mile long, 600 feet wide, loaded with debris. A couple of issues with a weather balloon 600 feet, when you have a site 600 feet long. Brazel also told them the sheep would not cross the field for some reason. They would not cross that field. Okay, so here's the way the story goes. They bring this material back. They show it to Blanchard. Blanchard tells this man here, Lieutenant Walter Hout, issue the press release. He issues it. All of a sudden, Ramey comes back, because he's the boss, get rid of it. Okay, so now that press release has been rescinded, a new one put out that it was a weather balloon.
Excuse me, is this within so many days?
Within hours.
Within hours, not days.
Brazel came in on the 7th with this stuff.
Yep.
They looked at it the next day, the 8th, the press release was put out, and it was pulled back the same day. Actually hit the papers the next day, but it hit the radio the very same day. Cavett, later on the 8th, brought Ricketts out with him. Ricketts worked for him. He was another Counterintelligence Corps officer. He was, but he was a sergeant. He brought him out there because he wanted another set of eyes, what was going on. Okay, now, here's the problem. It was written in the newspaper that Cavett and Marcel went out there. Cavett later said he was never there. Wait a minute, the paper had already interviewed you.
Right.
There's already conflicting stories.
And he never said that, he never said that Ricketts went with him. So what really happened, we're going to talk about that a little bit later, but let's continue with these men. This is Colonel Edwin Easley, Provost Marshal of 509th. According to the story, he held Brazel on the base for almost a week, questioning him.
Oh.
Under guard, never mind.
Okay. So here's the questions that we want to finish up this show with. Here we have these men. Now, General Dubose, he was promoted to colonel. He was promoted to general. So here's the questions that come up. First of all, Brazel had collected many weather balloons before. They look like what you're holding, what's right there.
Let's hold these up.
That's a weather balloon
Just
from
to
the
give
period.
you an idea what a weather balloon looks like.
That's an authentic weather balloon. This would be the tin foil that was used, okay? They may not know what this is, but they found this. And this is a radio sound, which they had seen many times because they returned them for rewards. Yep. And this is what weather balloons were typically made with. They would use a balsa wood, not the weather balloons, but the radar devices.
Okay, right.
So the question becomes, Brazel couldn't recognize a weather balloon. How is it possible that the base intelligence officer and the commander of the base also could not recognize a weather balloon? You need to know that twice a day they launched these from the top of the buildings in Roswell. The 509th did, for weather purposes, because we didn't have the weather that we had. So the question becomes, how is it possible that Major Marcel, base intelligence officer for the 509th, and William Blanchard, a West Point graduate and commander of the 509th, how is it they didn't know what these were? How is it they couldn't look at this and say, oh, that's a radar reflector, or that's a balloon? That's a question that nobody, Peter Jennings did a report on this, people have done a report on this for years. The question has never been discussed. How could they not know that? The second question, if the debris found is only that of a weather balloon, then why was it necessary to send samples to Fort Worth, Texas, and then on to Wright Field, which we now know as Wright-Patterson?
Wright-Patterson, yeah.
In fact, General DuBose here said he received some of that material at Wright-Patterson. Okay, so there's another question. If this is just a weather balloon, why did all this happen? All right. So what we have here is we have a story of some men who are apparently at the top of their positions for the 509th and commander of the whole base, Roswell Army Airfield, not knowing what a weather balloon looks like.
And these are intelligent people. I mean, you're not talking to the everyday person here.
You have a rancher who would pick these up, weather balloons up on a regular basis, still could not identify what it was. They said, hey, we have kids picking these things up on a daily basis. So the whole beginning of this discussion and the purpose of this particular show is to present the issues that we have here, the people involved and the issues. Why could they not recognize this if in fact this was only a weather balloon?
Now, do these people have relatives that are still alive that would be willing to speak now, or?
They have. Actually, that's a good question. They have. Sheriff Wilcox's daughter has said a number of times what her father said he saw. Recently, who just passed away was Jesse Marcel's son, who was also became an Air Force officer. Marcel brought some of this stuff home, showed it to his wife and his son actually did things, and he, until he died, would say, that's not what I saw. I did not see a weather balloon. He goes, he was a major in the Air Force too. He goes, yes, I knew what I saw. He goes, it was not a weather balloon. Relatives of, who was the other relative that we talked about? Brazel's son.
That's it, yep.
Brazel's son said he saw some of it because his father stacked it in a shed. And again, he goes, it was no weather balloon he had ever seen either. So what we need to do is we need to examine this a little closer. And what we're going to talk about in our next show is what we learned really happened in Roswell in 1947, based on 21st century knowledge.
Yeah. And a lot of the legitimate news sources may, for whatever reasons, be steering away from something like this because of the world of media that we're in right now.
Well, they were directed. They were directed.
In 52, they were pretty much given direct orders.
Even today, there could still be hands off with some.
Well, that's a very interesting thing because I've told this story. I've told this to Larry. I've told this to you a couple years ago. The 70th or the 50th anniversary. I'm sorry, or last year, the 50th anniversary of Roswell. I was scheduled to go on a TV show, a national TV show. Everything was set up. My arrangements were made. I'd fly to Roswell. We were going to do this, and everybody's seen this show. And all of a sudden, everything stopped. And when I called them to say, what's going on, my response was they apologized profusely. They said, this has never happened before. But in effect, what they told me is that they were told that they should follow the traditional lines of evidence for Roswell, not to get into the stuff that we're going to talk about in the next show, some of the new evidence. They said, really don't follow those lines. Stay away from that for the time being. And they said, so we're just not going to do it. I said, all right. I mean, that's okay with me. I don't care. So in our next show, we're going to show you some of the evidence. Well, I'm going to show you what I have for some of the evidence. But we're going to talk a little bit more about these people and what they actually said later on. Every one of them, including people like Apollo astronaut Edgar Mitchell and General Arthur Exxon, which is another one, what they talked about, what happened at Roswell.
The other thing, too, I want people to remember that name, Roger Ramey. His name is going to pop up later on in a future show on another incident very similar to what went on here.
When we talk about the Washington, D.C. incident in 1952, right. Ramey was brought in there because he was their UFO expert. But if there was no UFO, how could he be their UFO expert?
How could he be an expert?
We'll talk about, and what he told the press. We'll talk about what he asked the press to do. But that's a different show.
Now, are you still finding out new stuff about this all the time yourself? I mean, you're in a world right now. Are you still in touch with a lot of people that are, because we know a lot of your background you can't discuss, but do you still speak with a lot of people that have got a good handle on these things?
Yeah, I every now and then I might call them and say, hey, did you hear this? Oh, did you hear that? And they'll say, yeah, this is what we know. Now, sometimes they won't tell me anything, but they'll give me a hint. You got to go with that. But yeah, what we're going to talk about is what I learned from them within the last 2 years, what they actually found and the issues.
Yes, our next show, we are going to touch on a very interesting subject, let me tell you.
And I know if I was a viewer out there, I'd say, oh, I want to know now, why are you doing this? Because it's big enough that we can't fit it into this show. I mean, it's enough for people to understand. And I could spend another half hour just on what happened at Roswell, the people that went out there. They actually brought in an astrophysicist and geologist afterwards by the name of Lincoln La Paz, the government did, to take a look at what happened out there. And he, in fact, did find that there was a furrow there as well.
Well, sure.
So you could go on and on with this as what happened. There were nuns that went on record. They would report all the celestial events. They would keep a log. And on the night of July 4th, they saw something truly unusual.
Well, how can you not trust a nun?
How can you not trust a nun?
And as I said in the beginning, Rick, this was the most famous UFO event that I believe in modern times. And to this day, the truth has not been completely said.
Right. And you know, we have stuff on here. And one of the explanations that they had with Roswell was that, they saw markings on an I-beam. And what the explanation was, well, what you saw was some Christmas tape, some leftover Christmas tape. So when they built the radar reflectors, they used the Christmas tape to hold the pieces together. Well, here's Christmas tape right here, and even a child's not going to misidentify that as being hieroglyphics.
Hieroglyphic, that's what they saw.
And that's what they said that they were. And even so, if I'm building a target or a device to check if the Soviets are using weapons, I'm not going to use Christmas tape to put it together.
Hey, where's the Christmas tape?
Yeah.
Even as a government operation, I'm going to, maybe I can use some hot glue or something like that. I'm sure they had something else. So, we're gonna look into what really happened at Roswell. I'm gonna tell you what I learned, and I'm gonna tell you, to be honest, I wish I hadn't learned some of this, but I know it. You can't unknow it.
Yeah, the next show, believe me, we were gonna get into some very interesting subjects. And Rick, as usual, you're right on your game. I want to remind everybody, please email us at theviewshow@AOL.com. We love to hear from you, and I'm so excited. This is our kickoff to our next season. And boy, we couldn't have picked a better subject, right, Rick?
Oh, I think so.
Well, we want to thank everybody for reviewing, and please tune in to our next episode of The Telescope View. Thank you.